You got it. Let me go
Thanks.
find that.
Perfect. So we'll have the attendance document for you guys. We'll drop it in a few times throughout the session. Just put your name on it and that'll be your clock hours form. Okay, and at the very end, we'll also have a review for this session as well. A little bit about me. I'm from California, so it's pretty awesome to see San Diego representing today. And so yeah, I'm from California. My experience has been, I've been a special educator for years. Prior to that, my introduction to like this world has been through my brother. His name is Michael and he has Down syndrome. So that was sort of how my family got into this, whole spiel. And I loved our presenter this morning. She had me tearing up because I could just relate to that. I had to turn my screen off for a hot minute. So anyways, we're going to get started here. Okay, so I wanted you guys to introduce yourself, your role in your district, but I know you did that already this morning. So I think what would be great is if we could, in the chat, indicate our knowledge of UDL and differentiation on a scale from 0 to 2. So you put in the chat if like you're here because like you're at a 0, you have no background knowledge, you're here to learn. 1, if you have some, but you're still struggling with like how to tie it together. 2, you've got it, you know the principles, you just need assistance with like systems scaling up implementation. This is great. I see a lot of 1s and 2s. Awesome. Very great. Oh, this will be exciting. Cool. Keep those coming. 1.5, I like that. Good. Awesome. All right, so this is our agenda for today. We're going to start with the inclusionary practice of differentiated instruction, which sort of leads into universal design for learning. So then we'll see how we're feeling. We might take a break and then we'll start our work with the UDL. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our time together today with a case study analysis. We're going to present a kiddo that might be in one of your classes. And let's sort of think about how we might frame a lesson plan if we're a teacher, or if we're a para, we're in the middle of a lesson, what can we do to support that student? Or better yet, how can we start to think about including paraeducators in the instruction so that they can provide some of their unique expertise, being that they're oftentimes with the student all day. So we want to sort of think about how can we come together as a whole group. So that'll be what we spend our bulk of our time on. And then of course, questions. I have set aside space for questions at the end of each sort of big chunk of information, but please write in the chat if you have a question. Jessica will cue me to it. I don't want you to hold on to your question and forget it. If I do think it's going to come up later, then I'll say that as well. Okay, so I think it's always important as educators that we have objectives going into the things that we're about to learn. So following this breakout session, I hope that we'll be able to know, do, and understand the following strand objectives. I want you all to understand differentiated instruction and its 4 main principles, and then be able to differentiate an existing lesson for a target student, or I'll give you like a scenario and we'll think about ways that we might be able to differentiate on the fly. 3, I'd like you all to understand universal design for learning, that framework and its 3 principles. And then finally, I want you to understand the relationship between differentiation and UDL. They are different. They sort of, interlock sometimes, but we want to be able to understand the differences there. And then the big, sort of summation of today is, can you create a UDL lesson using the UDL framework? Obviously not going to be perfect because this will not be a lot of time to work on it, but that'll help us get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the inclusionary practice of differentiated instruction. So what is differentiated instruction? To start, differentiated instruction occurs when instruction is tailored to meet the individual learning needs of students during a lesson. To differentiate means that instruction is tailored using various means to access the lesson content to support knowledge demonstration. Differentiated instruction does not change the lesson content or outcomes, but it changes the way the lesson is taught or how it's accessed. So simpler, when a lesson is differentiated, we might add something like a supplementary aid to help with student understanding. This could involve presenting the lesson in a different way, similar to reteaching. And we'll move into some more specific examples throughout the course of this presentation. But so far, we want to think of differentiated instruction as we've made our lesson, we're teaching the lesson, and we're noticing that kids aren't necessarily connecting with it. And how we notice that we'll get into as well. But that's when we're like, oh, we need to sort of make some changes here to see how we can get students to access the learning more effectively. So what does it look like? These are the four main principles. We have content, process, products, and learning environment. So each of these four guiding principles assist individuals to find ways to make lessons more accessible to individual learners. So starting with content. Content, in a sense, is what the student needs to learn or how the student will access the information. The principle of content requires ongoing assessment to aid teachers in determining what knowledge, understanding, and skills students need to learn. So if you notice through formative or summative assessment data or through observation that specific students might be struggling to understand the content required of the lesson, you can consider some of the following ways listed in the yellowish box to try to differentiate the lesson. So first, you could try using reading materials at varying reading levels. You can try putting text materials onto tape. I think that's a very old school way of saying, try an audiobook or record yourself. You can use spelling or vocabulary lists. You can present ideas through audio and visual means. You could use reading buddies. Consider meeting with small groups to reteach an idea or skill for struggling learners. Also consider using differentiation to extend the thinking of advanced learners. Just like our keynote mentioned this morning, we have, historically started making lessons for what we consider like a normal learner. And then our students who have disabilities who are struggling, or students who don't have diagnosed disabilities who are struggling with a particular subject, they're getting left out of this learning. Similarly to our advanced learners, what are we doing to keep extending their learning is also really important with differentiation. Also, by the way, you guys have these slides in your little toolkit. So if you're struggling to take down the notes, they're there for you. So you can just be present and have your questions. But you'll be able to find all the slides in under the presentation file for today. So the second principle of differentiated instruction is process. So process involves activities in which the students engage in order to make sense or master the content. Process is then the way in which students learn and understand content. So when students are identified as struggling with process, consider trying the following differentiated instructional techniques. So again, they're listed there 1 through 5 in the yellowish box, but you could try tiered activities through which all learners work with the same important understandings and skills, but then you proceed with different levels of support, challenge, or complexity. 2, you could provide interest centers that encourage students to explore subjects of the class topic of particular interest to them. You can develop personal agendas or task lists written by the teacher to be completed at specific times. You can offer manipulatives or other hands-on supports. And then finally, you can vary the length of time a student takes to complete a task or encourage advanced learning to pursue a topic in greater depth. So it's during the process phase where supports can be provided to assist in the student being able to eventually be able to process the content on their own. So you should see so far that between content and process, we're not really changing our lesson planning. We're just noticing what's going on and adding a support to assist the student. Particularly helpful when you get your brand new batch of students each year. We're trying to figure everybody out. So that observation time is really helpful in being able to, take a lot of data and sort of seeing, who does what and when and what might be supportive. Try things out to see if they work as well. Never be afraid to try out a new strategy. So the third principle we have is products. So that looks at the culminating projects that ask the student to rehearse, apply, and extend what he or she has learned in a unit. Again, through assessment data, you'll notice a student might be having a difficult time achieving a particular score on a project. If that is the case, consider the following differentiation techniques. One, you can give students options of how to express their learning. Two, you can use rubrics that match and extend varied skill levels. Three, you can allow students to work alone or in small groups on their projects. And four, you can encourage students to create their own product assignment as long as the assignment contains the required elements. Another way we can understand this principle of differentiated instruction is by providing opportunity for students to express their uniqueness and to not be confined to one specific way on representing their content. All right, and the final principle of differentiated instruction is learning environment. The learning environment in this capacity refers to the way the classroom works and feels. We all have our own systems and routines in our classroom that work for us, which includes a specific environmental layout. So consider making changes to your classroom structure to aid in the learning of members of your classroom community. Some examples you could do would be making sure there's places in the room to work quietly without distraction, as well as places that invite students to have collaboration. You can provide materials that reflect a variety of cultures and home settings. You can set out clear guidelines for independent work that matches individual needs. You can develop routines that allow students to get help when teachers are busy with other students and cannot help them immediately. And five, you can help students understand that some learners need to move around to learn, while others do better sitting quietly. So this principle can be the most challenging, I think, for a seasoned teacher that might be really comfortable in the systems that they have set up in their room. They are working for the majority of students, but they might not be working for some. So we want to think about what can we do for that other population that, like this mentioned, like needs some movement, or they do better working independently in a quiet space, with headphones, or they crave that collaboration. So I think it's really important to look at each unique individual and accept that not everyone learns the same. So your room setup from year to year might look different. Even though it's a layout or a structure you might have grown fond of. The biggest thing that I usually recommend with the teachers that I work with is if you have a kiddo with behavioral challenges, modifying your classroom environment so that not everything is by that student that might engage in throwing behaviors. So you might have to take your gorgeous, array of pens and pencils. And I know that was my desk. I had all my pens and my pencils, and you might have to put them away that year. Same goes with like artwork on walls. You might have a kiddo that's just really distracted by those types of things. So maybe the artwork could be in the back when he's facing forward, and limiting the distraction so that the student is engaging on you and the instruction itself. A lot of different things you can do in your environment. Okay, we're going to do a knowledge check. I hope this works. I like doing these in some of my classes. So I want to try to do a waterfall response with you all. And what that is I will read the question aloud, and I want to provide a few seconds of wait time. During that time, type your answer into the chat, but don't hit send. Okay? So think about your response, type it into the chat, don't hit send. And when I say go, then we'll all hit enter at the same time, and we should get a waterfall of responses. And it comes really quick, so it's fun. Any questions about that? Okay, I can only see a few of you, so please unmute if you do have questions. Okay, so here's the prompt. Name just one of the 4 principles of differentiated instruction. Remember, don't hit send. One of the 4 principles of differentiated instruction. Okay, we're gonna hit enter in 3, 2, 1, go. Oh, very cool, everybody. Nice. That was a great waterfall. You guys are so good at this. That makes me happy. Great. And it looks like almost every single one was represented. So that's really great. So what that tells me is you all sort of have an area where you might already feel comfortable in differentiating. There's one that like speaks to you where you're like, you know, maybe I haven't been doing that well and I know I could do that, or that is still my strong, that's my bread and butter, and I'm going to keep representing that principle. So now I want us to think a little bit further on that. So think about, so we're looking at the responses that came in. Think about what I just had you do. Did any of you experience challenges with how I asked you to submit your answer? You don't have to say anything, but just think about that. Were there any challenges associated with the presentation so far and how I asked you to submit your answer? If not, let's think about some kiddos you might teach or have taught. What could I have done better or could have differentiated to enable them to be more successful in submitting a response? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat. Yeah, we got voice to text. Option for verbal response. Yes, have the question on the slide. Pictures, wait time. It's great. Giving more options for products. Yes, I love that. More visual responses. Pictures, question up on the screen. Yes, great. Right, so I already see you guys are attending to what could have been better, because what I like to do as an education specialist is when I would plan with my teachers, I predominantly taught high school, so my responsibility was co-teaching algebra, physics, English, and humanities. And what I could bring to the table was, that was a great lesson, but I didn't understand it. So if I, the adult, am not going to be able to understand this, how are our students who are experiencing this for the first time going to be able to understand it? So we want to think about that. And it's great to run by your lessons from, you know, even like a family member to see if they can sort of follow along with your thinking process. Right? Because we all know that, like, if you read something aloud, you're going to find way more mistakes than when you were proofreading it just in your head. So think about that with your lesson planning. Differentiation is not necessarily a tool you use when lesson planning. It's more of an on the fly, oh shoot, this kid's not getting it. What can I do to assist them? And the things that you all just mentioned could be things that you do on the fly to get more responses, or they're things that you start to plan. And when we start to plan for these things, that's when we get into UDL. Okay. So why is differentiation important? Differentiation instruction moves away from one-size-fits-most approach to teaching, in which all students are given the same instruction delivery and are expected to produce the same product output. Additionally, teachers can differentiate what and how they are teaching to meet individual student needs. And then finally, unlike individualized instruction, which has had very specific plan for each student, differentiated instruction uses the same learning plan for all students. So these 3 points suggest that using these instructional strategies and supports, they support students of different abilities so that they can be more successful in their general education classes. So why should we use it? For starters, differentiation does not require extensive time to lesson plan. It doesn't have to be in your lesson plan at all. It's that, you know, on the fly, we see this is going wrong, we need to fix it. So it enables all students to receive core instruction in the general education setting, which is obviously a win. And then differentiated instruction works well alongside other evidence-based inclusionary practices, such as response to intervention, universal design for learning, MTSS, and then of course we're going to get more into UDL shortly. As I've mentioned a little bit already, there are some limitations to differentiated instruction. It's often an afterthought. We've planned this lesson based on the majority of our students. And if we're a good teacher, we're going to see when kids are struggling and we're going to provide these supports. Okay, we're not just going to teach to the general or the average kiddo and hope that they can grasp something. And remember about your gifted learners too. If we're planning a lesson to the average, but we're not giving stretch, we're limiting the growth of all the individuals in the classroom. And then another limitation is that general education teachers can often experience feelings of unpreparedness when attempting to differentiate lessons. That is a skill that special education teachers are trained in being able to do. It's becoming more prominent in teacher education programs now, where their general education teachers are getting this type of instructional strategies. But for those of you who didn't go through credential programs in the last year, this can sometimes be the consensus of general education teachers feeling unprepared, not quite knowing the appropriate accommodation or strategy to use. And then differentiated instruction also takes away from your instructional minutes. So if you think about it, you're teaching a lesson, you notice that a student is struggling, you want to provide that strategy for the student, but now you have to stop, provide that strategy, and then pick back up. So you're losing instructional time when we're differentiating. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it can be really easy. You have things sort of prepared on the side, like a word bank or a number line, and you could keep going on with the pace and the cadence of your lesson and provide that strategy pretty seamlessly. And then finally, for me, this is one of my hot button topics as a high school teacher, is that it can often isolate or stigmatize learners. So if we're going around and you have become really fluent in differentiating on the fly and you're passing out the number lines, you know, sometimes you'll get that kid that's like, oh, no, I absolutely don't want that, because I'm noticing that only the kids with maybe more physical or disabilities that are a little bit more aware, those student has just now been put into that group. There's a lot of awareness with our kiddos. So we want to make sure they have what they need, but then oftentimes kids at the high school and like maybe junior high level, even 4th and 5th graders, you know, kiddos start to become aware and they might refuse it. And we don't want that to happen because we want them to have what they need to be successful. So that's it on differentiation. Do we have any questions so far? And again, I can't see some of you, so please unmute if you do or write in the chat. Zoom wait time is the worst, so I'm trying to be patient. All right, we'll keep going. Please remember, write any questions in the chat. Questions will help further our thought process, so they're great, and I love questions. Okay, now we're jumping into UDL, and UDL, like I mentioned before, differentiation and UDL have similar components, but they're also very different. Some historically have seen UDL as being like a precursor. Oh no, sorry, differentiation being the precursor to UDL. All right, so what is universal design for learning? Universal Design for Learning, or UDL as it is commonly referred, is the framework developed by the Center for Applied Special Technology, so CAST. CAST was founded by a group of researchers to explore using new technology to provide better educational experiences to students with disabilities. UDL is a framework that works to improve and optimize learning, optimize teaching and learning for all individuals based on scientific insights into how humans learn. Additionally, UDL has expanded to be a framework that works to meet the needs of all learners. And to meet the needs of all learners, UDL assumes that the barriers to learning are not in the design of the environment, or in the design of the environment, and not the learner. UDL provides a perspective that moves away from viewing an individual for their deficits and looks at how the environment can be manipulated to enable the student to be successful. That one really speaks to me in regards to what we just learned about differentiation in the learning environment. And then finally, by removing the barriers, it allows all learners to focus on the content of the learning objective rather than specific activities. Thus, the framework for UDL is essential in fostering inclusive learning environments in any setting across grade levels. I know as a teacher, I would make this super awesome lesson plan, and it had a great culminating activity, and it just didn't work, right? And we have to be able to be like, it wasn't the kiddo. This activity didn't meet the needs of my students. So what can we do, right? That allows kids, allows individuals to be able to show what they know outside of maybe this awesome activity you have planned. Because granted, it was awesome, just didn't work, right? And so it's not the kiddo's fault that it didn't work. It's our responsibility to find a way that everyone can be successful. I think the coolest part about UDL is that it's evidence-based. And not only is it an evidence-based inclusionary practice, but it's the research is from neuroscience. This is neuroscience research. So neuroscience in UDL talks about each individual brain process information differently. The way we learn as individual is as individual as our own fingerprints, okay? So the concept of UDL is based on research in the fields of neuroscience, cognitive psychology, and learning science. The results of this research guided the 3 principles for implementing UDL. So it's really cool because every principle relates to 3 different parts of the brain that are associated with the principles themselves. So I think that's just so cool because as educators, I feel like aside from like Bloom's taxonomy and all those like old school ways that we teach, this is like right up in our brain, like all this neuro pathways, which I don't even understand, but it's so cool. All right, I'm gonna play a little video for us. So this is gonna serve as like, here's like a basic overview of Universal Design for Learning as presented by David Rose, who I think he's the former director of CAST. And so he's gonna take us through some of the principles and practices of UDL. And then following the video, we're gonna really dive into it a little bit more extensively because I know a lot of you are in the 1 to 2 range. So this video will help serve our like fresh, new, I don't know anything about UDL people that are joining us, and then we'll get into the other things. Okay, let me make sure that I share my sound.
In many classrooms, the focus is on an illusory average student. Many curricula are designed for that student. Cognitive neuroscience has shown us that there really isn't an average student anywhere, and that's why it's an illusory student. Universal design for learning, though, is particularly focused on making sure that we get those students who have been marginalized, for whom that designing for the average student has never worked well. And that certainly means students who have been struggling, students for whom English is not their first language, students with disabilities. They've been typically marginalized by this illusory average curriculum. Secondly, though, students at the other margins, the students who are called gifted and talented, are also students who've been underserved by this mainstream curriculum. They haven't been challenged. They're bored. They're underserved as well. UDL is a framework based in cognitive neurosciences for designing learning experiences that work across a wide spectrum of learners. Its main purpose is to make sure that everybody is a successful learner and reaches what we call being an expert learner. That is, they know a lot, they know how to do a lot, and they love learning and want to do it more. The key to universal design for learning is that we're designing learning experiences which from the beginning are designed to be universal and to make sure everybody learns. And that design is primarily based on the power to be very flexible in allowing choices, in allowing different paths, in allowing for things to be presented in different ways so that we reach those other two things, universal and everybody learns. The three principles of universal design for learning come from careful analysis of what learning really is, and particularly the research that has been done by thousands of other researchers in cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychology, which have carefully looked at what comprises learning. How does learning really work? And what are its differences among individual learners? From that work, we've abstracted out three simple principles that are involved in any learning situation. How does the learner pick up information? How do they express and act on that information? And how are they engaged by the learning situation? There are three broad principles. The first has to do with how we present information to the learner. And we talk about multiple means of representation. As it turns out, there's no one way that we can present information so to be successful for everyone to learn it. So we talk about multiple means of representation. So in UDL, we talk about providing multiple representations so that we're sure everyone will be able to make sense of the symbols, the language, the drawings, and so on. Take, for example, in teaching mathematics, it's typically very strong to use multiple representations, not just the symbolic expression of the numbers, but manipulables, things that the children can operate on and see directly and perceptually rather than their symbolic form. So that's a great example of providing multiple representation, both the symbolic number and a physical manipulative. The second principle is provide multiple means of action and expression. And that takes into account the fact that students vary greatly in how they express what they know, how they can act skillfully, how they can communicate in language or in drawing and so on. And students differ widely, so we say we must provide multiple means of expression over the course of our teaching and learning. The third principle is multiple means of engagement. And in many ways, it's the most important principle. If we don't engage students in learning, don't make it important to them, make them motivated for it, then none of the other forms of representation and expression will be that important. Within Universal Design for Learning, when we look at a curriculum, we think of four main components, and each of them need to be universally designed. The first component is, what are its goals? How do we translate standards into things that are important to do in the classroom? Secondly, what are the materials that are going to be in that classroom? Everything from a chalkboard to a textbook to a workbook to something on the wall. Are these materials key to learning? And if so, are they universally designed for learning? Third, the methods. How does the teacher go about teaching when she or he is working at helping students learn? Does she set up collaborative groups? Does she lecture? Does she provide experiences out in the world? And lastly, and very important to Universal Design for Learning, is the means of assessment. How are we sure that learning really occurs? When we began our work, we, like most people, were focused on learners who were doing poorly, who looked like they had disabilities. Over time, we began to change our focus because we could see when we were in classrooms that the classrooms were in fact disabling, that they were not designed properly to ensure that every child would succeed. And we began more and more to see that the curriculum itself was disabled, and that the work of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines is to reduce the disabilities in the curriculum itself so that more students succeed, more students have optimum challenges, and come out as expert learners in the end.
I love that video. It's a little on the older side, as you could tell by the, the pixels and everything. UDL has also since changed the order in which they present the 3 principles. They're still the same and they're still all as important. They've just sort of changed our thinking in regards to what we should think about first. But I hope that video sort of set the stage. I really love the way David Rose presents. He's just got a nice smooth cadence to his voice where I feel like it's easy to follow along. Yes, there was a question in the chat about posting the video. I forgot to add it to the folder, so we'll get to that right after the presentation. We'll have another one, a video coming up, and we'll add that one as well. Okay, so why should we use UDL? As if that video wasn't enough. This is a quote that I really like. For CAST and many others, the ultimate goal of UDL is for all learners to become expert learners. Expert learners are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-oriented about learning. So when using the UDL framework, it's the expectation that all learners become expert learners that are motivated to succeed. Self-determination can be an area of challenge for many students with cognitive delays or other disabilities. Fostering students to become self-determined will give them the confidence they need to succeed or pilot their own life in the future. I think this is a really important component about UDL. And for those of you who maybe have kids of high school age, there is so much learned helplessness at that age. And you're just like, how am I going to let this kid graduate and be out in the world? Even a student with, no diagnosis or, any sort of disability, like, the way we teach in some ways can be more harmful than helpful. And so we want to make sure that while we're planning for our lessons, we're creating ways for students, individuals to be able to learn for themselves, set up ways that they can try to figure out an answer, have that routine where, ask 3, then me. Where you're encouraging communication among the peers and you're encouraging kids to seek out answers for themselves or just help in general. I hated writing IEP goals for students that were 18, which was like, I will ask for help. How do you at 18 need a goal for that? So that's something really important outside of the education that we're trying to teach the students that UDL also addresses, which is that component of self-determination. So I really want that point to drive home here. Let's look at UDL and examples in the community. So looking at community or society examples, some of the most common examples of universal design in the community are curb cuts, closed captions, elevators, speech to text, video calls, etc. So if we see in our imagery here, we have a before of a curb and we have the after when it's the cut. And just think about how many people that one decision has helped, right? We have, of course, individuals with wheelchairs who it was made for, but then we have families with, strollers, people carrying their groceries home and like little grocery carts, elderly folks who just, maybe can't get up a step, visually impaired people, because we have the bumps there, which sort of cues them that a street is coming? And how about us as individuals, typically developing people, teenagers who are texting and forget to look down and forget that there is a street and traffic coming? We know those bumps cue us to look up. I had many a run-in with a couple of fast-moving bikes when I was in college. And thanks to those bumps, it made me look up, get off my phone to safely cross the street. So we want to think about that in our lesson planning. What can we do to assist? Maybe it's just this one student that really is having trouble getting over this hump, and that it's also going to assist everybody else in some sort of way. So common classroom examples of UDL would look like flexible seating, flexible timelines, speech to text, text to speech, autocorrect, computers, etc. Flexibility here is key, just like we see in differentiation. How are we being flexible to support all learners? Another thing I'll add here is flexibility for the purpose of accessibility is key. So if you're familiar with individualized education plans, IEPs, you might notice that a lot of the examples I've provided sound a lot like accommodations. They definitely are. So when we think about kiddos who have these plans, when we're writing the plans, we start to think about things that we know would assist them in times where maybe a lesson was not universally designed. So accommodations in a way are more like differentiation instructional strategies. The lesson was designed for a specific group of kids, and we need to provide the accommodation so that that student is successful. But when we use UDL, we could, in theory, take away the IEP, take away that list of accommodations, because now we're just giving a student a lesson that they can be successful in. So there would be no need to, I don't know about you all, but like to memorize all the accommodations that this one kiddo has or have them posted because they're legally binding. It's stressful. What if you forget one? I'm sure we've all had that parent come at us. Well, my son says that he didn't get his spelling list today. You know, how can we avoid those like dramatic moments? And, you know, it's not for anything malicious. We're human and we forget. So if we can plan from the beginning how a kiddo can be successful, that takes away that that big burden we have to carry with memorizing all of these things for each individual student. So if a classroom culture is designed to access student challenges using student strengths in relation to the learning objective, then the student will have greater access to the lesson content and thus a greater chance for mastery and developing self-determined skills. All right, so our 3 principles of UDL, as we just learned from David Rose, are engagement, representation, action, and expression. So these principles are based on variability rather than disability. And when we look at engagement, we look at how one can engage all students. It's in the title, right? The second principle of representation looks at how one can present information in ways that reach all learners. So we like to, a lot of times, highlight present is right in representation. Okay. And then the third principle of action and expression looks at how one can offer purposeful options for students to show what they know. All right, so this image is in your folder and it's been provided by Cass. And as you can see, they did sort of switch things around. Now they have engagement first, representation second, action and expression third. And then within each category of this framework, they talk about access here on the left. They talk about build, and they talk about internalize, and then the overall goal of each column. So we're going to go through this.
There's a neat question in the chat that I think you should speak to before hitting
Yeah,
on this.
definitely. Let's see. In your experience, do schools have accommodations that allow students with physical disabilities and wheelchairs to get around schools and foster independence? That's a really awesome question. I would probably say that For students with physical disabilities, depending on their age, it can often be an IEP goal as written maybe by a physical therapist or an occupational therapist that has to do with mobility. And if that's the case, then the team would be privy to that, obviously, and they would make sure that they're providing multiple opportunities for a child to work on that skill. I wouldn't consider that to be an accommodation, because we don't have to like allow an individual to like move around the school. But maybe an accommodation would be if the student takes longer in the restroom. An accommodation maybe at the high school level could be is allowed to like leave class or early or be late to class based on the need in the restroom being longer than a typical student. Usually accommodations are just more like protections in case, I don't know, I've been hearing a lot of horror stories lately about like teachers not letting kids go to the restroom, and these poor kids are having accidents right in their seats. So there's sort of like protections to protect against that teacher that might not allow something that seems just very reasonable. My
I
experience at
see
schools.
Barb's second comment, and I feel like I agree with you. I mean, legally, the schools are supposed to be held to having or getting whatever the students need. And a lot of the time, all you can do as an educator is like rearrange your classroom and allow for time to leave a little before the bell rings or some things like that. And sometimes the things that the student needs are kind of outside of what you as an educator can directly get. And all you can do is help advocate for getting those things, because a lot of the time they're going to come from administrators and even above that. So
Yeah,
it's really contextual.
Definitely. And I think if we're talking about accessibility, it's a very hard topic. Like how are the schools prioritizing the funds for that student to get them things that they need to navigate the environment? I'll use my brother as an example. He has Down syndrome. He's in a wheelchair. My family was told that he had to go to a specific school to provide him with equipment. We believed them. We went there. He did get equipment, and the equipment he got was a stander, different sort of tools to help assist him with like holding pencils and eating. But we called it their bluff, and we're like, this doesn't really make sense. He should be able to go to any school and get a stander. But then there are different pots of money. So we're really getting into complicated things. In California, there's a program called the Regional Center. There's also, I'm forgetting the other one. It's like a mobility company, but it's not necessarily the school's responsibility to buy a child a wheelchair. It's those other agencies come into play when it's like a kiddo needs a stander or a wheelchair or big major equipment like that. But things like communication devices, absolutely the school's responsibility. And I know from experience that they can be very hard pressed to get that piece of equipment in the timeline that is needed for the student. So I would encourage everyone on the child's educational team to, keep pressure in making sure that the kid gets what they need. And we're not talking about like the Cadillac or the Rolls Royce of service. If we're looking at like communication devices, the kiddo needs to go through an assessment, a communication assessment, to find the device that will work best for that student. I've had families be like, I want like this Tobii Dynavox eye gaze system. It's like, well, I don't think that's appropriate. Here's why. This, and this is based on our assessment results. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that if you feel very strongly about a kiddo needing a specific piece of equipment, find people that you can talk to. And if it's about mobility, talk to the physical therapist and the occupational therapist, talk to the kiddo's case manager. talk to the principal. I see another question. How do you teach and encourage kids not to use accommodations when they're capable of completing a task without the tool? Oh yeah, it's a great question. I think IEP teams, we need to start making the shift towards families feeling very strongly about needing to collect all of the accommodations. I have a cousin whose son has autism, and she called me the other day. She just moved to Oregon, and she's like, read my IEP, tell me what you think. And I was like, you have way too many accommodations. And she was like, what? I had to fight for those. And I was like, does he need this? Because he's like 4 years older than when you first fought for this. Does he still need it? And I think we need to like truly look at what the child needs to be included in an IEP and sort of help the families, if you are present, help understand that if the child no longer needs it, it shouldn't be there. And that's a good thing. That means that the kiddos are making progress. And at the high school level, when I really was working hard on like, you're going to be alone out in the world soon, you will not have all of these things to support you once you turn 18 and you leave us. So I need you to practice doing this. Now, for me, it's legally in the IEP. The parent doesn't want me to take it out. So I call the parent and I say, hey, I'm very concerned that in this amount of months, your child's gonna leave school here. And I would really, really like your permission to attempt to do some of these activities without these things, or teach them to ask for them, or teach them to like, here's where it is. And if you need it, you get it, right? Or here's this toolkit. If you need a number line, it's in your own binder. You take it out and you get it. So we don't want to look at it as, I'm just going to take everything away, especially without parent permission. You know, and also getting parent permission is a gray area because it's still on the IEP saying that you have to get it. So think about it as, I'm setting up all the accommodations. They are all available in this environment. I have taught the child to know where to go to get that accommodation or how to ask for it. I'm not just going to say, you didn't ask me. I'm going to be like, do you need something? Do you need something? Thinking about different levels of prompting. I see another one.
Do you mind me jumping in on that? And just, I've kind of found that if you give options to learners of like, hey, do you want to try without this time? And usually in kind of low stakes environment. So like, this isn't a test or this isn't a whatever. We're just kind of running through it today. Do you want to try it without whatever that sport happens to be? A lot of the time they say yes. A lot of the time they say, no, I don't want to. And then, you know what? It was a question. It wasn't, so then absolutely you get to do this how you want. But a lot of the time, just kind of giving options and giving power to a student in a low stakes, not stressful environment really kind of has done the trick for me. And really just kind of posing things as positive. So just like differentiated instruction, we have differential reinforcement as well. Like you may get a little more of my attention or a little more free time or whatever it is because you completed it without this certain support. So yeah, thanks, Jessica.
I saw somebody talking about Regional Center in California. Thanks for mentioning that. That is the exact experience my family had, and it just made everything so much easier with the school district. But I am new to Washington, and I don't know what is here to help those families. So I'll do some research about that. Another comment, I always struggled with my son's school because the primary accommodation that was provided was an aide, but then they complained that he depended on her too much. That is such a great comment. First, I'll say that having an aide, if it's a one-on-one, that would be more considered a service rather than an accommodation, because the accommodation is not intended to be with an individual like all day. So usually in IEPs, we would consider an aide to be a service, but the accommodation could also be have access to an adult outside of the teacher within the classroom, because it research does show that like kids are going to be more inclined to ask for help from maybe like not the primary teacher, because there's that fear related there. So if there is another adult circling the room, be it another co-teacher, even better, that support can be met. But is it Laura? I think I can't see the full name, but I think in that situation, you're so right. And I talk about my families about this all the time. I get the need that like the aid is useful, it's supporting the student, but then it is detrimental. It is creating learned helplessness. And in some cases, you can find a really great aid that like totally gets it, and they'll come in and help the kid, and then they're going to leave the kid alone and like go help somebody else. But it's often very hard to teach paraeducators that skill for a number of different reasons, but the number one being they have different contractual like hours. So getting the time with them can be really difficult. There are some schools doing really great things with their paraeducators and including them in trainings. But the overarching thing is it is a very difficult skill to assist a student and then leave while also teaching that student independent skills. So we try in the special education field to not just hand aids out to everybody. Like you truly need it for behavioral reasons, toileting reasons, accessibility reasons. My brother had an aid. He couldn't even manipulate his wheelchair for years. So there was like an obvious need for him to have it. He couldn't use the restroom by himself. He didn't have any behaviors, but he couldn't feed himself, hold anything. Like he needed it, right? But then as years went on and he could start to do things, we took his aid away because we're like, we don't want him relying on this adult all the time, but we want an individual that he can go to when he needs help, but we had to teach him to be able to do that. So that was like his whole journey leading up to, post-secondary when the aid situation was more flexible. I'm going to keep going with the presentation. Jessica, if you can keep commenting, but draw my attention to one that may be a little bit more complex. Okay, so principle of engagement here. So we have research done by Cass that indicates that individuals, when they're properly engaged, their affective networks are active. And I don't know if you can see in this image right here, this is where our affective networks are. And this is the why of learning. So when we look at their framework, right, we're going to start with access right here. So for access, we must provide options for recruiting interests. This can look like optimizing individual choice and autonomy, optimizing relevance, value, authenticity, and minimizing threats and distractions. For building, we're providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. And that can look like heightened salience of goals and objectives, varying our demands and resources to optimize challenge, foster collaboration and community, increase mastery-oriented feedback. And then for internalizing, down here, we're providing options for self-regulation, promoting expectations and beliefs that optimize motivation, facilitate personal coping skills and strategies, develop self-assessment and reflection. And the goal for engagement would be to develop expert learners who are purposeful and motivated. So when we do all of these things related to engagement, we will eventually get a learner who sees learning as purposeful and is motivated to participate in the learning. And I think it's not my best example, but think about all the times that our kiddos asked you, why is this important? Why do I have to know this? There's great memes out there where it's like, survived another day without doing sine, cosine, tan, like, why do we need to know that? What I like to tell all my kiddos is I'm not limiting your learning. You might reach some phase in your life where suddenly you actually need to use sine, cosine, and tan regularly. It is my job to provide you with everything that's available and to be able for you to use it in the event that you choose to use it, because we don't know what you're going to do when you grow up. So why am I going to limit you? Think about that about kiddos with more significant needs. You know, we might have families, my own family included, where we said, just let them have a fun time. I don't know that I agree with that anymore. Yes, I want my brother to have a fun time in school, but I would have liked him to have learned more. And I think the team of educators should have pushed my family to be like, we think he's capable of more. My brother can read, which is really cool. And we never thought he'd be able to. But it was one educator that was like, I am going to teach your kid how to read. We are going to learn as much as we can. You know, that is my like promise to you. And I think that's really important. And if we don't have that piece of engagement, we're not going to have the buy-in, and kiddos won't want to learn, right? A lot of kiddos will just learn because they know it's the right thing to do and they're going to listen and follow the rules. But if you think of a kid with more significant behaviors, maybe it's oppositional defiance behavior, you've got to find that engagement piece. How to find engagement. Okay, so how do you engage all your students in the class? You know, so we have some like questions and examples. In what ways do you give students choice and autonomy? So one way you could do that is to survey students about their interests, strengths, needs, and of course incorporate that into finding lessons. It's a great beginning of the year activity. You don't know the kids, they don't know you. It's a great way to share and build trust. How do I make learning relevant to student wants and needs? Use choice menus for working towards goals. A choice menu to me sounds potentially very stigmatizing if it's just for that one kid. We see them a lot with kiddos with significant disabilities. So how can you try to build choice into the framework of your whole class where everyone has these options for choice? And it's not just kiddos that we're having like a hard time with. In what ways is my classroom accepting and supportive of all students? State your learning goals clearly and in a way that is relevant to all students. I love it when I can go into a classroom and see clearly written on the board what kiddos are supposed to be learning today. Like by the end of the day, they need to learn this. And it is even cooler if you go up to a student and say, hey, what are you learning today? And they can point to the board, even if they can't read yet. They could be like, we're learning this today, and here's the picture support for it. So try to think of ways you can make things engaging and visible, and that helps with all students. Okay, representation. So this looks at the what of learning, and this is our recognition network that's looking at that what question. So when leveraged properly, the recognition network becomes active. So in regards to access, we provide options for perception by offering ways to customize the display of information, offer alternatives for auditory information, offer alternatives for visual information. When we build, which is again this one right here, we are providing options for language and symbols, clarifying vocabulary, clarifying syntax and structure, support with decoding text, notation, symbols, promoting understanding across languages, illustrating through multiple media. And then with internalize, we're providing options for comprehension, to activate or supply background knowledge, highlight patterns, critical features, big ideas, relationships, guide information processing and visualization, maximizing and transferring, and generalization. And then the goal would be to build learners that are resourceful and knowledgeable. This principle for me is sort of, this is when you are really creating your lesson. You've done your homework on what's engaging and like the ideas around the type of lesson that you could do to promote that, you know, that buy-in and that, oh, this is really interesting. Like we think of like the hook to a story. Can you play a really cool video at the beginning of the lesson? Can you have like a riddle, like whatever it is, whatever your class loves? And then representation, this is when you're really planning a universally designed lesson. Until you're fluent with this, it's gonna be difficult. So I would say seek out your special educators, seek out your individuals in charge of English language learners. they are super experts at this. If we look at, promoting understanding across languages, we can think of our kiddos who English isn't their first language, our kiddos with significant disabilities who might use an alternative augmentative communication device. That is also a second language. Using an iPad to communicate, it's the same as learning English. It's their second language, and they need to hear all of that repetition and modeling for it to become fluent for them. And the only way to do that is by promoting that understanding, by illustrating through media, supporting decoding of text. So this is where you're building accommodations that that work with a few students and providing them to the whole class. This is when I don't really agree with an IEP, and that a kid has to be super below average to get one. That doesn't seem right. I struggled so much with spelling in school, but I couldn't get an IEP because I just struggled with spelling. But no one gave me the support to be successful at spelling. No one gave my family any strategies to be successful at spelling. So think about that. Like, we don't need kids to be on IEPs to give them what they need. And that's what I love about UDL, is you're seeing where they are at and where they can be, provide them with that support and make that support available for everyone. And then you have this communication with your students regarding how you teach and your goals for them, right? You have to be really clear with our kids. Like, we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. This is the point of all of this. We want you to be successful. If you don't want to use it, that's fine. But let's brainstorm another thing that might be useful for you, because we don't want you to fail at this assignment. Okay, so some questions to help frame our thinking around how we can promote representation. So how to present information that's accessible to all. So this one common question asks, have you considered options for how printed text, pictures, and charts are displayed? So again, this is the instructional component of your lesson. How are you displaying information? Are you just talking at the kids for hours on length like I am? Right? Are you providing visuals, different colors, funny jokes, varying your affect? So you want to make it easy for students to adjust, and font size and background colors through the use of technology can be very helpful. What options do I provide for students who need support engaging with text with auditory difficulties? So to provide options for engaging with text, you could do text-to-speech, audiobooks, partner reading. We never assigned a book to the class that didn't have an audiobook option. I think that is just a great way to go. And you'll occasionally get kiddos that have that accommodation in their IEP. And what are you going to do if you've assigned the book for the year or the book for the quarter, and that's in the IEP, but you can't find an audiobook? I hate to say it, but you're going to have to find a new book, because that kid legally gets an audiobook. And then think about all the other kids that don't have IEPs, who are better listeners than they are readers. Now I'm sort of getting into the nitty-gritty, which is all of this depends on your objective, right? If your objective is to understand the book, then it can be presented in many different ways: partner reading, read it yourself, audiobook. If your objective is to learn to read, audiobook is not going to be the best option, but it could provide a secondary teaching strategy to read it and then hear it. Read it and then hear it. That's a really good tool to have when kiddos are trying to read on their own. Okay. Lastly, we have action and expression. So the strategic network, right at the front of our brain, is active in action and expression. And that's the how of learning. So how are kids going to show you what they've learned or what they have not learned? So in regards to access, which again is right here, we need to provide options for physical action. So we want to vary the methods for response and navigation, optimize access to tools and assistive technologies. We want to build and provide options for expression and communication. This is where we use multiple media for communication, use multiple tools for construction and composition, build fluencies, and graduated levels of support for practice and performance. And then in internalize, we want to provide options for executive functions, guide appropriate goal setting, support planning, strategy development, facilitate managing information and resources, and enhance capacity for monitoring progress. And then the goal associated with this principle would be to develop learners that are strategic and goal directed. So this column is our product. Like if we relate it back to differentiation, this is how we are going to know who is learning and who is not. And this is when we need to remove from our thinking that our awesome activity that we've planned, that can't be the only way a student can show their learning, as awesome as it is. I've made so many awesome ones, and it just made me angry at times to be like, I can't use this, what? But that's not the kid's fault. I need to be flexible. So, think about, this is where I really think rubrics are especially beneficial. You have very clearly laid out, this is what you need to have learned or present to me that you know in order to get a good grade on this assignment. I still ask my college professors, you gave us a very open-ended assignment, which I love, thank you, but where's the rubric to make sure I can present to you everything you want to know? You guys might have heard of project-based learning schools being super big right now. They're using the principles of universal design in a way that, provides students to be able to use their strengths. We all have different sort of creative strengths to show you what they know. I love poster presentations. I love making it super cool looking, make it 3D, whatever. Some kids hate that and they want to do PowerPoints, but they're going to tell you everything that they know and it's going to be awesome. So for action and expression, throw out the activity, provide them with the set of goals that are important for them to know based on that learning standard, based on the curriculum, and give them the opportunity to show what they know in a different way. It makes it so much more enjoyable too as a teacher and a grader. Do you want to read an essay of 25 kids? That was not my favorite thing about co-teaching English. So second semester of English, we were like, you know what? We do need to make sure you know how to write an essay. So we're going to assist you in figuring out ways to make sure you know how to write an essay. But if the project is for you to demonstrate that, could it be a PowerPoint about when I write an essay, I need to make sure I have a thesis statement. A thesis statement for me looks like this, right? They can write it, they can speak it. You can have family members record for kids who might not be able to talk. You can have peers record. It's even better to have a peer voice. You could do group projects. There's just so many options. All right, so some common questions relating to action and expression. How can I offer purposeful options for students to show what they know? When can I provide flexibility with timing and pacing? Calendars and checklists are really helpful to help track subtasks for making learning goals. That's a very common accommodation, scaffolding the assignment. It can be very overwhelming for any kid to be like, here's your assignment, and they don't have the executive functioning skills, even in high school, to be a very effective, efficient highlighter. So providing a checklist is going to benefit all students, having it broken down. Have I considered methods aside from paper and pencil tasks for students to show what they know? We just kind of talked about this, but allow students to show what they know through a variety of formats, such as poster presentations or a graphic organizer. Am I providing students access to assistive technology? I hope so, because that would be taking their voice away. If you aren't, if it's related to communication device, if it's related to accessibility for motor planning, again, I hope you're providing access to that, because then you're taking away the student's ability to engage in an activity. My brother, which I don't think I mentioned, he has a very hard time holding writing implements or anything in his hands. He has a disability called arthrogryposis that makes that very difficult. So he uses his iPad for communication as well as typing, finding pictures. You can make sentences in a communication device through picture supports. Right? All that stuff is good. So you want to make sure you provide students with access to common assistive technology. And that could be such as speech to text or text to speech. So when asking yourself all the questions, these should help you create lessons that are designed for all students from the start, rather than having to scramble at the last minute to try to provide access options for differentiation. Because remember, differentiation is where you've made your lesson and on the fly, you're realizing it's not working for some kids and you're providing those supports. If it's a kiddo with an IEP, you should know about those supports that are needed already and they should be ready to go. But you're still like providing them at the beginning of the lesson or during, rather than taking that into consideration from the start. Okay, versus UDL, where you're using that information in your planning. I will say, as someone who was new to UDL back in the day, the first year of me really committing to it was difficult because it required so many different components and me shifting my thinking. But now I consider it to be way more fluent at it. I've built a bank of things that are now universally designed. So every year when I get a new crop of students, I can take my lesson that's already relatively universally designed and adapt it again to my new set of learners. So it's not like you can be the seasoned teacher where you can pull out, like, oh yes, week 3, here it is, right? You could still pull out week 3 and then be like, I have these kiddos, I need to do some work so that week 3 lesson fits these kids. All right, why is UDL important? It benefits all students in the classroom. It provides educators with a variety of strategies and resources to help meet diverse learning needs. It improves accessibility to learning opportunities. It increases student success. It identifies each student learns differently and can benefit from having a variety of learning formats, flexible assignments, and tools to help with organization and information of new skills. I'm probably quoting this incorrectly, but I learned a couple years ago about executive functioning, and it's like women will reach that sooner than our male counterparts, but that's still like in a range of 25 to like 28. So we need to think about like, you should be able to do this, when we're asking them to complete a complex assignment. Well, really, they can't yet. So keep that in mind. So we want to start early. What are the possible outcomes for utilizing UDL? Again, benefits all students in the classroom, provides intervention to individuals who have been identified as at risk. I personally love this one. Why can't we provide students supports as early as possible? And how can we do that so that it's not the typical pull-out model? The downside to a pull-out model is, students aren't receiving instruction from that individual who is trained to give that instruction. I'm trained as a special education teacher to deliver instruction that can fit the needs of my students, right? I know how to make it work for them. But I'm not the best person to go to if we're talking about algebra, history, the water cycle, right? We need to have general education teachers who passed those tests be the ones delivering that instruction. Third, students with individualized education plans are able to receive instruction in core content areas, like I just mentioned. We want to make sure when using UDL that we have and are using more opportunities for stretch learning. Again, that's when I think the action and expression piece is so cool, because you could make an entirely different rubric if you wanted for stretch kids to like really show their stretch thinking, or include it on the same rubric so that other kids can see, where they can like try to stretch. Like, here's where you are, here's where I think you can be. And then ultimately it will help make individuals more self-determined and confident in their learning. Important things to remember. UDL makes learning more accessible in general education classrooms, presents information in ways that adapt to the learner instead of asking the learner to adapt to the information. This builds flexibility to allow students to use their strengths to address their areas of growth. UDL also reduces stigma by giving information in a variety of options to all students and not single out the few in need of formal accommodations. So I like these two next slides. We're going to talk about what UDL is and what UDL is not. UDL is scientifically valid. It is a flexible presentation of response and engagement. It reduces barriers to instruction, provides accommodation supports, and maintains high achievement expectations. UDL benefits all students, including students with disabilities, English language learners, and highly capable learners. What it is not. UDL is not simply a technology used in classrooms, right? It's not this magical thing that you can just buy a license to. It is not individualized support designed for students with IEPs, right? It's universal. We can take into account the needs that specific individuals have, if they have an IEP or not, but then we're providing that support to everyone. UDL is not another version of differentiated instruction. As we've learned, differentiated instruction is our on-the-fly accommodation. UDL is our planned access, full access to the lesson. Okay, knowledge check. We ready? We're gonna do waterfall again. Okay, here's your question. Remember, do not submit until I say go. All right, the question is, enter in the chat at least one of the principles of UDL. Extra points if you're able to define the principle. Take about 5 seconds. Okay. In 3, 2, 1, enter. Oh, you guys are so good at the waterfall. Great, a lot of engagement, awesome. A lot of action and expression. And a lot of people defining it. Well done. So it's great, nice job, everyone. Okay. So we have about 30, give or so minutes left in the presentation. I have quite a few slides left. So I have a really cool 10-minute long video for you. I'm not going to share it, but I'll put it in your folder for you to watch at your leisure because I want to be able to provide time for questions. I've seen a lot of cool stuff coming in the chat. I'm trying to push us along. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the basics of differentiation, let's compare it to universal design for learning. So when we're using the strategies of differentiation, changes, accommodations, modifications in the lesson are made in response to learner needs, right? We're seeing what's going wrong, we're addressing it. These strategies assist in changing the student to meet the needs of the lesson, right? So we are super happy with our lesson. It does not need to change. So we're providing an accommodation so that the student can try to adapt to what we're teaching. Doesn't sound super great the way I just said it. So that's down here, right? So we're making changes in response to learner needs. This occurs post-instruction, or it can occur during instruction. And then we have principles of UDL up here. They do not seek to change the student, remember, but they seek to fix the lesson so that it is meeting the needs of not just one student, but all students. To do this effectively, lessons are planned in anticipation to student needs. Tools and methods of differentiation are built into the lesson from the start. So you're taking those differentiation strategies that we know work, but we're building them in and we're giving them to anyone that wants them. And then we see where everything meets, right? We're meeting individual needs. We're giving students access. We're creating highly supported, engaging environments, multiple ways, okay? So those are the differences and the similarities, and the similarities is where the two really come together and it works.
Before we move on, I want to point you to a question in the chat,
Yeah.
and then a pretty awesome response following it.
From Lois, are we doing a disservice if we teach a variety of formats when real world workplaces? I think that's a great question, Lois. So if through UDL, I think what Lois is asking, if we're focusing on the strengths rather than the individual's challenges, are we doing them a disservice if, like I mentioned before, a lot of these accommodations are going to go away eventually? Lois, I think you're very right in that respect. I don't necessarily see it as a disservice, but the disservice would be not planning instruction to create that self-determined learner, right? So if we're planning instruction that is truly UDL, then it also has components of building those self-determined strategies and knowing what works for you. Because if you know what works for you, there's no reason why you couldn't advocate for that for yourself in a professional learning environment. If that learning environment says no, I don't think that's the best learning environment that the individual should be working for, right? I think that's when we need to also educate students, like, this is what your strengths are. These tools we know assist you in meeting these goals. What Jessica said earlier, this is a very low stakes assignment. How about you try to not have this word list, right? How about you not have this number line? Let's see if we can do it another way. Realistically though, a student could carry a number line in their pocket, right? Like an employer can't tell you, no, you can't use a number line. If they do, again, I don't think that person should work there. So there is some sort of back and forth. And then a comment, I think that universal design advocates for cultural change and is not limited to a school. Yeah, if we educate all students' strengths in this way, they'll eventually become the job creators. Yeah, who will allow the flexibility that people need. Yeah, great comment, Hannah. In California, again, which is where my experience is, for individuals who have significant disabilities, we oftentimes try to put them into a job rather than looking at what their strengths and interests are. And when we put them in the job, they oftentimes just fail at that job because they're not interested in it. And, there are those jobs that we can associate with people with disabilities having, picking up trash in the park, those types of jobs. But why can't they do something else based on their interests? I'm going to stop share real quick because my computer's freaking out. Can everybody still see or hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
And presentation's now not in presentation mode.
great, thank you. Okay, I can't see any of you, so I'm going to put it back in presentation mode and keep going.
Christina?
Looks good now.
Christina,
Yes, yeah,
may I say one thing?
yes, please.
You're really great. I graduated from Oregon, my PhD, and then I had a professor who taught this class, and I also co-taught this class with her. But after looking your presentation after 7 years, I can see that you are much better than I had.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you.
And
I've worked.
definitely
Yeah.
your dean will be very happy to see that, because your dean, current dean, she was our previous associate dean and professor in Oregon. She'll be very happy to see these things if she will see it, because she is very knowledgeable.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And please do share, if you can, the PowerPoint, if you can.
Yes, the PowerPoint is included in your
Yes.
packet. I just need to upload the videos for you all.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you all, I'm having a few technical difficulties. I can't see you at all. which is a
Christina, what if
bummer.
you stop sharing your screen for a second?
You know worries.
Yeah, I can't at all. I think I'd have to turn off my computer, honestly.
We're here.
Well, I can see it as is. Can you keep clicking through the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'll keep clicking through. I just can't see any of you, so just, alert me to anything.
Okay.
Okay. I'm also not going to put it into presentation mode, sorry.
I can
Okay,
see it as is, so I think you're okay.
perfect. Oh, so I didn't describe this slide. So I think this is a really cool image of this slide right here is differentiation. We're providing language that's like, beware of the moose. And look, it's in multiple languages. We're drawing our attention with this nice geometric shape and color. Then we have UDL where it's like, oh, there's a moose. Car's gonna hit it. And I think that's a universal sign for be careful. So that's another way of how UDL is represented in our community. So when we're implementing UDL, we want to think about that there's one goal with many routes to get there. Our goal is, again, to create self-determined, motivated learners that are engaged in what they're doing. But we can get there a bunch of different ways. And we don't want to limit your strengths as an educator because, think about the educator that really, impacted you as a learner. And they impacted you in a way specific to their personality coming through, which is really important. So don't limit, your strengths in being able to educate kids. So what you want to do is determine a present location. So where you are at in your ability to be able to do UDL. Set a destination or goal. So set a goal in this amount of time. I'm going to feel comfortable with X, Y, and Z. Maybe your first start is engagement, or maybe you want to start with action expression. Okay, set a goal for yourself and a timeline, and then select individualized routes. And that is sort of when maybe you're focusing on one student at first to start becoming more fluent in UDL, and then expanding that to another student who might have significant needs. So don't feel like after this presentation that you have to go look at your whole roster, know everything about every individual and create the absolute perfect universally designed lesson. It could happen that way for you. And I would say bravo if you could pull that off, but it's probably more realistic if if your goals are focused, short-term achievements, leading up to a long-term goal. Okay. So we want to start with why. Starting with why helps us understand why we do what we do. We want to have the teacher perspective of what do you do? Why do you do what you do? Excuse me. So think about, this has been a really difficult year. Are you still in it to win it after this year? I would say if you could get through this year, every year after this is going to be like a piece of cake, right? Of course, it's going to have its own unique challenges, but we all just survived, a really difficult time that's still technically not over, right? And then for the learner perspective, why are we learning and why is it important to persist when it gets hard? We want to teach our students that what we're doing is different. It might be difficult at first. It might always have difficulty embedded for as long as they're your student. But how are we going to teach them to keep persisting when it gets hard? And again, that's one of those things that we want our kids to, be good at by the time they leave us. Like I mentioned in the beginning, education is really important, but it's better to build a whole person. And through UDL, you can do that. Through inclusion, you can do that. Having a peer with significant disabilities on a project with a typically developing peer, both peers are learning from each other. One is learning maybe how to act appropriately, where the other is learning that there are other individuals that act differently and how to be compassionate or supportive. So that just helps build a whole learner. Why is engagement? What is about? I think I wrote this one. Why is engagement and how teachers enlist strategies and provide multiple levels of challenges to motivate students and help them develop perseverance and coping skills. Okay, so we're looking at like why, how, what sort of model, if we want to break it down that way. Here's another quote I love. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn, from Benjamin Franklin. So this is one of those things where it's not enough me giving this presentation. Hopefully this presentation was less, you know, well, it is me talking at you in the best way that I can make it, you know, jazz it up. But remember to teach kids things. And part of teaching is giving them those strategies to be successful. It's not enough to just tell them, because it is going to go in one ear and out the other. So if after this presentation, you never revisit UDL again, that's going to be like a bummer for you and your kids. And for me, I'm going to feel sad that I, you know, couldn't assist. So I would say, if you're here with a school team, make sure you revisit these conversations. Have somebody that you could be like, remember like engagement? Like I've forgotten already. Keep those conversations happening. All right, so here's another super cool video, which I'll put in your file. Essentially, it's another individual from CAST talking about learner variability. And he used an example of a Rubik's Cube. He has a friend who is visually impaired, so he's blind, and he's like a super genius, like coder person. And they were talking about Rubik's Cubes, and the guy is like, well, I would like to try. And of course, like, what do the colors help, you know, somebody that's visually impaired? So they came out with a Rubik's Cube using Braille. But then you have this white Rubik's Cube with Braille, and you have this colored one, and it's like, why do we need two, right? And equate this to your lessons. Why do I need to have a lesson for this individual that has visual impairment? And why do I need to have another lesson for this other group of individuals? So UDL is putting them together. So then you have a Rubik's Cube that has the Braille and it still has the colors. So it's, this is probably not the greatest quote, but you know, sort of like one size fits all. But one size fits all, when we think about it in the traditional sense, is sort of like, here, take it or leave it. But we don't mean that in this situation. We mean that we're creating one thing that meets the needs of all. Okay. Okay. Questions, and it is 11:42. So before we talk about questions, let me show you what I have planned for the rest of today. So we can use the time to address questions, which I'm super happy to do. I've also prepared a case study for you all. You've heard me talking about Mikey. This is my brother. He's 26 now. This is high school graduation. I wish I could see your faces because he's so cute. And I plan like scenarios. Like in this scenario, I have a few questions on how we can differentiate the learning environment. In this scenario, I wanted to push you all to think of a universally designed lesson. So, and if we choose scenario 2, I was hoping to do all of them, but in scenario 2, I wanted to push you all to do a universally designed lesson, thinking about maybe one that didn't go so great, you know, at the end of the year, or maybe one you're thinking of doing at the beginning of the year. So I want to touch on this real quick, but when you're making a lesson, you always want to have your state standard, your lesson objective, your structure. And your structure is going to be how you're doing engagement, how you're doing representation, and how you're addressing action and expression, okay? And then of course, you need to have assessment. Assessment is, you know, how do you know that the kids are learning or not? And that is when we look at your assessment strategies also being designed with a UDL lens. A couple things that we've put in your drive to take home with you. This is the front side of a double-sided document, but it's taking the principles. These ones are out of order because, like I mentioned, this was done in 2019 and now they've reordered. But thinking about representation, you can go through these different questions as like a checklist for when you make your lesson. So you can make a lesson and then you can refer back to this to be like, did I make it correctly using the UDL lens? And we have engagement, we have action and expression. And again, it's a 2-part document that's in your drive. We also have this one, which is a little bit simpler. So it's not necessarily asking you super detailed questions about every strand of the framework, but it's giving you more of an overarching thing. Is this happening in your planning? You know, right up here, yes or no? Give examples. So this could be like your starting point if you're new to planning universally designed lessons. And this can be sort of like your ending point where you're really going through like the fine details. Also in your drive, we've included what we call a tip sheet. So the tip sheet was made by the IPP demonstration sites team. So Jessica, myself, and our colleagues put together like a 1 to 2 page PDF on like the need to know information on various principles to promote inclusive strategies. So we have the one on differentiation in your electronic file. We have the one on universal design for learning in your file. We have the CAS matrix that I showed you in the beginning, the classroom checklist that I just showed you, and the fidelity checklist. The presentation slide deck is also in your file. It's not in PowerPoint form, it's in PDF form. If you want other tip sheets on, maybe you didn't attend like some other sessions, I saw a couple individuals bouncing back and forth, which is a great use of time. But if you were super engaged and you loved my talk and you didn't get to go to any of the other ones, you can check out our website, ippdemonstrationsites.org. And on that website, you can go to tip sheets and you can find like all of them. You can print out every single one. We don't have all of the inclusive strategies up yet. We're still working on them. And they also come with videos. So you could find like a short 10-minute clip of what is UDL, take that back to your school site. Okay. And then we have references. And then Jessica, if towards the end of our conversation, if you could drop in the chat the link to the instructor evaluation, please let me know what you thought of today. You know, the good, the bad, the ugly. I can take it. So this is, you know, this is to help me learn where I can do better in this presentation, where you thought we needed more information, maybe more time, I think would have been good. And that's it. So yeah, let's do some questions. And again, I can't see you all, so if you could feel free to write your question, and Jessica, if you could read them aloud, or either or.
Not a question, but some praise that I'd be happy to read out loud.
Oh,
this was
yes.
amazing, very informative. I'm excited to bring this back to my staff.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think I've learned I need a better computer system because it would be great to see people right now.
If you have any questions, you're welcome to write them in the chat. You can also unmute and say them out loud.
I definitely sped through the end of the UDL, so if you need me to repeat anything as well.
Christina, are there any books you recommend, particularly to UDL in the early childhood setting?
Yeah, definitely. I could compile a resource list and also include that in the drive. But one off the top of my head that I just read is called UDL and Racism, which you guys are actually all getting. So we recommend that one because it really approaches, and somebody wrote it in the chat earlier, that it's not just about individual strengths and stretches in UDL. It's also about taking into consideration different cultures and languages of individuals. So UDL or anti-racism and UDL, you'll all be getting. That is a great resource. And it's not for early childhood per se, but all these strategies work for each individual, each age level. I'll make a note.
I have a
to
quick
compile
question.
this. Yes.
So this was a great presentation, and I appreciate it very much. UDL seems very much like something that is targeted for all classrooms, especially typically general education classrooms. But this presentation and the work we're seeing seems very targeted at a special education population. Do we have resources or are planning for resources for getting this idea out to where I think there will be more resistance, the general education classroom?
Yeah, I would say inclusion in itself is, this was not your question, but inclusion itself comes from like, you know, a racism like justice movement, and sort of the disability aspect of that sort of joined along the lines, joined it. So we have that intersectionality between disability, ableism and racism. And I would say, to answer your question, think about a general education class that maybe has absolutely no one with disabilities in that class. If that is the case, you're still going to have students that have different strengths and different stretches or areas of improvement, areas that they need to, you know, grow. I think you will get resistance when you're working with maybe teachers who have their lessons planned for the full year, they never divert, and they do hold the ideology that it is that my lesson is perfect and the student needs to change. You know, we can look at, or we can all think back to teachers where we just were really unsuccessful in their classrooms. Was it really us? No, it was the lesson. It was that it didn't provide our strengths to shine. Just like my struggles with spelling throughout the years, I now don't get graded on whether or not I can spell a word right, you know, and I have spell check to help myself get through it. I can't remember the second part to your question, but the first part being, yes, you will experience resistors, and it's just encouraging this new growth mindset that like, you're a teacher, you're doing this because you care about kids. If you're not, I think you need to reassess your job. And I know that would be a really difficult conversation for somebody who's maybe been teaching for 30 years. So I would consider starting them with, you know, to promote inclusion in my very first job, I of course used the kids who had very little, you know, in like their disabilities weren't super major or anything like that. And it was sort of just really committing to working with that individual that it is okay. You will be okay, and we are here for you. Your review won't be reflected if by trying something new, you fail. And no one should fail if we're giving them support. I'm not sure that answered your question. If you want to restate it again, I'd be happy to give it another go.
I think it's also a bit of leaning into this idea and belief that we collectively as educators are all responsible for all student learning, and all of our students in the school and in the community are gen ed students first. We all are educating them and we're responsible for their learning and their happiness. And I think it's some of leaning into that, which is really kind of a social cultural shift, right? And like a school's mission and vision, but not just an individual school, a school district, a professional learning community, a state. That's kind of where my mind's going with what you asked.
Yeah, I really like that.
Can I just add that there seems to be a little bit of a bias against gen ed teachers that have been teaching for many years. I am a gen ed teacher that has been teaching for many years, and I am not this closed-minded. And many of the teachers in my school are not what I just keep hearing, oh, you know, if they've taught for this long, they're not going to look at their practice. I constantly tell my students, if you didn't get this, it's my fault, not yours. I need to figure out how you're learning. I need to look at, and I don't think I'm an exception. So I think, and I've seen newer teachers that are exactly what you describe as the teacher set in their ways. So I just think realizing that there could be a bias, and I think I hear this a lot from special ed teachers that gen ed teachers, there's this feeling that we don't want to do inclusion, and I have seen that so far from the truth. We need support for those students. And I know that's difficult to give support for those students. And it doesn't necessarily mean we want another body, but it depends on every single student, and it depends on their story and their skills. And I think there's a lot of gen ed teachers that are doing that, even us that have more than 20 years of experience. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I just keep hearing this bias, and I'm like, that's not true.
Yeah, I think that's super well said. And I think you nailed it. That is my bias. That's the experiences that I've, have had, but it is actually more so not the case anymore. And you're so right. The majority of the quote unquote resistors, if I can see that, have been the special education teachers themselves. There's this fear that, they, or even I got into teaching because I wanted to be with these type of students. They're my kids, and I don't want to go into this other world. So I think everything you just said is super true. Like, we all have our bias, and I think buy-in with special education teachers is actually probably the hardest to get.
First off, Laura, thank you for that perspective. And I do want to say that it's been my experience that there are far more teachers like you than otherwise. And as a person who has both endorsements in special ed and general ed, I can appreciate working with those really collaborative gen ed teachers who wanted to see every face in their classroom. And so thank you for that. And thank you for your advocacy for students. My question, the very end of my question was, for those resistant teachers, are there materials that are targeted at that gen ed classroom to assist them and to provide them with examples of just how readily their current lessons could be converted? I guess I'm looking for resources for the gen ed class that's targeted at the gen ed to say, this isn't reinventing the wheel, this is a new perspective. And if you had those, if you could throw them in the chat or the folders, those would be great. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that last part of the question, since I forgot. UDL is not a special education initiative or tool. It's a general education initiative. So the resources that I've shared are all general education tools. So I think this one is probably the most valuable in terms of the intricacy that lesson planning has oftentimes. And I think that if I go back in my presentation, this one from UDL or from CAST is a very good snapshot to have on the wall to have those refreshers. In regards to lesson planning itself, there's no formally designed lesson plan that has been developed by CAST. And I feel like that might be because lesson planning is so unique or special, and it really highlights the individuality of a person oftentimes. So there's nothing really out there that's like, you have to use this lesson plan template, because that is also not very UDL. We want you to be able to have your strengths associated with it. But I think this slide should provide some assistance. A general education teacher knows way better than a special education teacher the importance of the state standard, the importance of the lesson objective. And then where UDL comes in is it's highlighting the importance of the structure of the lesson that needs to have these components. So where your traditional lesson plan might have in the video talking about the methods section, that's when you really want to utilize those different checklists that we've included in your drive to help make the lesson more universally designed. what I haven't written on here is it's great to have like a materials list as well. Like what do you need to prep and have for the lesson? I can definitely look for more resources for you. But as far as my knowledge goes, this is a general education initiative. So everything is geared towards the general education teacher. But I can keep looking for more resources, and you guys will have access to this drive for forever. So I can keep putting stuff in there.
I know we only have 1 minute, but what I'm kind of hearing, Christina, is that like some of your best resources are going to be the ability to collaborate with the other educators around you.
Totally.
So whoever has that strength that you might need some help with, it is often under the same roof as you, maybe not in COVID, but I think we're moving there now. And I heard that from Laura of like, I want to, but I need some help. You know,
Yeah.
we often want to do these things. It needs some collaboration and help. And I think often when you see resistance, whether it's in a student in a classroom or a teacher in a school, like it's coming from a lack of support or a lack of help. Of I'm not supported in knowing how to do this, so I'm very resistant in doing it. So I'm just kind of hearing a consistent theme of collaboration in UDL, like collaborating with your students and collaborating with the people around you.
And I think my final thought is we have other sessions tomorrow. And if you're interested, Jessica and I will be hosting the master scheduling, co-planning, co-teaching section. And we're going to draw on a lot of what we talked about today in regards to UDL when we talk about co-planning and co-teaching, because I do think the expertise of having at least 2 individuals come to the table is way more productive than one. Because like I mentioned, I'm pretty good at strategizing and putting together accommodations, but I don't have that depth of the lesson mastery and content. So when you put those 2 together, it's usually a fun match made in heaven.
Right. And the things we're talking about tomorrow are systems in schools that can help support you collaborating together, because I know you as educators you do not have time, in your day for even eating your sandwich in peace. So time to collaborate needs to be created and then protected. So tomorrow we're going to chat some about that. Hope to see some of you.
Yeah. So I think thank you all for coming. Please fill out the evaluator tool. That would be really helpful. And if you've had any more questions, please put those in there. And if I didn't address your questions, put them in again and say that I didn't address them. And what you maybe need for the file. Any feedback is good feedback as far as I'm concerned. We want to make sure you get to your lunch. And does anyone have questions about the afternoon sessions today? Okay. Well, then I think we'll sign off. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you stay cool. And I'll see some of you this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.